Hello, and welcome to Wizards of the East Coast. We've got a new series we've been working on called Deepchannel Mentor, where we're going on a deep dive down to the depths of a single deck. We'll go through different builds for different budgets, we'll look at tactics, mulliganing decisions, we'll look at some games and board states, we'll look at threat assessment, and talk about the strategic ideas, and then we'll work on some improvements. We're trying to take the whole deck tech idea to a deeper level and present practical content that is both entertaining and useful for you. And for our first DCM, we're going to strip down and build up with Nethroi, Apex of Death. This is my absolute favorite commander. It's challenging to play, and there are a ton of ways to build it. For this first video, I'm going to walk through a very basic version, card by card, explaining some of the ideas behind those cards. And in the next video, we'll go into more depth about a number of the card choices, including the mana base. We've got Soul Ring, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different elves, and then we've got Nethroi Shaman, who's also an elf. We've got Birds of Paradise. Then we've got one-shot uses, Dark Ritual, and Green Sun Zenith, which can be used on turn 1 to get a Dryad Arbor, making it pull double duty. So it's both a ramp spell and it's a tutor effect when we need that. And then we have some really powerful 2-mana ramp in Bloom Tender and Priest of Titania, and we have a Skull Prophet. Again, we're going to watch very closely our human count. Skull Prophet is a human. Also, the human reason and the non-human clause on Nethroi is the reason why we don't play Avacyn's Pilgrim, because it's a human. And then we have Fabro Elder, which again pulls double duty. It's a 0 for Nethroi, but it's also a powerful mana accelerant. And Somberwald Sage. Typically, we're always looking to cast some creature at some point, so you just use this for that mana. It's great to cast Nethroi, and then use your other mana for your non-creature spells. So, like I said in the intro, 13 piles. So that's 3 piles right there. Then we've got our graveyard filler. Hermit Druid is the key. He's plan A. Satyr Wayfinder is just a really solid card that helps smooth out our draws. Make sure we make our land drops while filling the graveyard. It also dies to Skull Clamp. It's also a non-human. Stitcher's Supplier helps to easily fill the graveyard. He's worth 6 cards all on his own between entering and dying. So pretty efficient. And that's the name of the game, is efficiency. Then for our primary repeatable sack outlets, we have Woe Strider, which is just a new card that I'm trying. Again, I've built this deck like 100 times, so I've tried all sorts of different cards in it. Altar of Dementia is outstanding. It sacrifices, it self-mills. In a pinch, if an opponent has cast a Vampiric Tutor or a Mystical Tutor, you can sack one of your guys and mill them and make them lose their card. There's lots of corner case uses for it. And then, of course, the deck's primary win-con combo uses Altar of Dementia to mill out the whole table. And then Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder are just really efficient sack outlets. Then we've got discard outlets. Lotlith Troll is probably my favorite. It regenerates, it has trample, it's a great mutate target for Nethroi, and it can discard all the creatures in your hand, make itself huge, it deters attacks, it's incredibly useful. Fauna Shaman both discards and tutors, and then Tomb Robber discards and explores. He is a human, but he's a card that I keep coming back to because he has so many different uses. Again, he can get big at a moment's notice, kind of like Lotlith Troll, and deter attacks that way. And then we have our next category, which I call powerful zeros. And that's because they have 0 power on the face. And we have Golgari Grave Troll, Spike Weaver, a card that when you're swinging at people, it deters them from swinging back because you can stop all combat damage. Or if they have shenanigans like a Heroic Intervention or something, Spike Weaver can just stop all the damage from creatures that turn. Embodiment of Agonies, again, super underrated but super efficient threat. Often it's just a 3-mana 7/7 or 6/6 flying death touch that your opponents have to deal with. Polukranos has overperformed. His ability to escape from the graveyard, his ability to fight and kill multiple creatures, because our deck produces a lot of mana, really outstanding threat and removal card. The next category we call Powerful Ones. We have Stinkweed Imp as another way to fill the graveyard. Recruiter of the Guard dies to Skull Clamp, goes and gets Hermit Druid, goes and gets Lurrus, gets all kinds of stuff, gets a Caustic Caterpillar. Fiend Artisan has 1 power on its face, but in fact ends up being quite much larger than that. It's also a tutor and a sack outlet. Caustic Caterpillar is just a necessary evil, as is Scavenging Ooze. The ability to gain life, the ability to exile any card from your opponent's graveyard at instant speed, super useful. Selfless Spirit is a great Court of Calling target in a pinch. It's also something you can recast from the graveyard with Lurrus. If you bring back a huge army from the graveyard and you have this in play, they're going to need exile, or they're going to need to deal with this first before they can board wipe you. Ailey is another card. It's a non-human. The Death Touch is relevant more often than you would think. It sacks creatures, it gains life, and the third ability, the ability to sack another creature and then exile target non-land permanent, comes up more often than you would think, especially with how hard our commander hits and the fact that he has lifelink. Ramanap Excavator, this is a Russian version here. But we put a lot of stuff into the yard. We need to keep making our land drops the whole game. So he's in here as a way to do that. All-star of the deck, Yawgmoth Thrawn Physician. Again, he's a human, unfortunately, but he just does everything but your laundry. He sacks creatures, draws cards, kills other stuff, discards. It's outstanding. Karmic Guide is 1/2 of our game-winning combo, which we'll go through later on. And then Bane of Progress is just a great way to reset the board when your opponents have exploded with artifact ramp, or they're getting close to a win because they have all these artifacts and enchantments on board that are central to their game plan. Now this pile here should not be this big. This is the pile of creatures that have power 3 or greater. I'm just experimenting again. This is probably the 100th time I've built this deck. And I'm experimenting with more of the Death Trigger card draw guys, Grim Haraspix and Midnight Reaper. I've been pretty impressed with them so far. But it's just each one of these cards just serves a very specific purpose. First of all, you're never bringing Hogak back with Nethroi. You're casting it, and it's super easy to do with Convoke and Delve. Casting Hogak is just like an afterthought in this deck. It just comes up incidentally. Oh, I just have an 8/8 trample. Because you can Convoke the turn that creatures come into play. You can tap them for Convoke. Underrealm Lich is another backup plan. If Plan A, Hermit Druid, gets crushed somehow or exiled, Underrealm Lich is a great way to fill the graveyard while getting nice card selection. The ability to pay 4 life and make it indestructible makes it an excellent mutate target for Nethroi. A lot of times what people will do to stop you is they'll wait till you go to mutate and they will kill the creature you're targeting with the mutate in response. So at that point, Nethroi is just going to fall into play as a creature, kind of like Bestow, and you won't get your mutate trigger. So Underrealm Lich basically means that they're going to need to have a bounce spell or an exile effect. Destroy won't do it, because you can just pay 4 life to make Underrealm Lich indestructible till end of turn. Revelark is the other half of our Karmic Guide Revelark combo, primary win condition. Doom Whisperer is another kind of like Underrealm Lich backup plan. It's a great target for Nethroi to mutate because it has flying and trample, but you can pay a bunch of life, fill up your graveyard again if somebody Bojuka Bogs you or Tormod's Crypts you or what have you. Luminous Broodwrath is a card that I'm trying out because I just picked up a copy. Necrotic Ooze. The card is amazing. It has all the activated abilities of not only all the creature cards in your graveyard, but in all graveyards, and this comes up frequently. Shalai is a Court of Calling target to protect your graveyard. It's a great card. It's almost always the first creature with greater power that I'm bringing back when I'm mutating Nethroi, because it protects the team. they have to deal with Shalai before they can deal with your other primary threats. And then Lurrus is just gravy train. It's just value. In games where I don't feel like I'm going to be able to combo off because there's too much hate, and I just want to sort of get a value train going, and I cast a Recruiter of the Guard, I will actually go and find a Lurrus, because you can get any creature with toughness 2 or less. He has 2 toughness. And start recasting things from the graveyard, like Caustic Caterpillar, blow up your thing, recast it, Skull Clamp, Fauna Shaman, Altar of Dementia, and so forth. The next pile is removal. This pile should be smaller. This pile should be bigger. One of the big mistakes that I see a lot of players making, and it's a mistake that even I make, even though I know it's a mistake, is not playing enough interaction. Because I want to fit all these sweet creatures into my deck, and my deck is all about bringing creatures back from the graveyard. That's how I justify it. So we're going to test out some cards in this particular version, but when we build the final version of the deck at the end of this series, you'll notice that this pile gets smaller and this pile gets bigger. Right now we have Mythos of Nethroi and Assassin's Trophy for versatility. Then we have a Swords to Plowshares, because we'd rather give our opponents life than a land. Normally we'd be playing both Path to Exile and Swords. I think Swords is better. And then Nature's Claim, the best single mana artifact or enchantment removal. And then we have the Graveyard Matters cards. We have Living Death, which can wrath our opponents and bring back our graveyard. We have Splendid Wreck, which often, when I had Field of the Dead in the deck, this could be sort of a combo piece by making a ton of zombies all at once. But mostly now it plays like a ramp spell. Early graveyard, maybe get 2 or 3 lands in there, and then cast this on turn 3 or 4 and just leap ahead of everybody else in development. Buried Alive is essentially a tutor for this deck. What I get varies, but I will almost always, unless I have immediate access to Hermit Druid, get my 2 Dredgers and then 1 other thing. Or sometimes I'll just go for the win. I'll get Revelark and Karmic Guide into the graveyard. And then, of course, Reanimate, which can be used on our opponent's graveyards or our own, and takes advantage of the high life total that you start with in Commander. Next pile is Tutor / card draw. So right now we are using, we have our 2 dies, guys. One is a human, one is a zombie. Midnight Reaper and Grim Haruspics as our death trigger card draw. Then we have Court of Calling. You tend to put a lot of little creatures into play, some that produce mana, but then some that don't. And the ability to use them right away to cord for 3 or 4, get a Shalai, protect your graveyard, get a combo piece, is just incredibly versatile. This deck generates a lot of mana. Finale of Devastation can be played as a turn 2 Rampant Growth to get Dryad Arbor. If you're behind or you're missing land drops, it can be played on turn 3 or 4 as X = 2 to get your Bloom Tender or your Priest of Titania. It can be a win condition by getting to 12 mana and giving all your creatures +10/+10 in haste. It can also get things back from the graveyard. A common play here is getting Hermit Druid out. It dies before you have a chance to use it, and then finaleing it back from the graveyard to use it again. Mausoleum Secrets is a card I've been toying with. It's an instant, but it only gets black cards. But I've been pretty impressed with it so far. One game I went and got a Reanimate. Another game I went and got a Buried Alive to set up my graveyard more completely. And then in another game I got a Sack Outlet and was able to win on the next turn. And then of course Skull Clamp is just one of the greatest card draw cards ever printed. I want to talk about the lands too. We are using 3 of the ETB tapped 4 of the ETB tapped flip lands from Zendikar Rising. These cards are phenomenal, particularly Tangled Florahedron. On turn 1, it can be a land. On turn 2, it can be a mana dork. It's not an elf, that would have made it even better, but this card is outstanding because of the versatility it gives you. Hagra Mauling means that we actually have another creature removal spell in our deck without lowering our land count. Now, the fact that these lands come into play untapped is certainly a cost, but as I stated at the start of the video, we're playing at about a power level 7. Games tend to go a little bit longer. Few people are playing super duper wombo combos, so you have time to set up typically. You're not getting run down like a freight train, and you're not losing games because a land came into play tapped at the wrong moment. I mean, you are sometimes, but in general, not. Bala Ged Recovery, it's a land or it's a regrowth, and it's for 1 extra mana. It's phenomenal. Undo Inversion, I have not cast the spell half of this yet. It's 8 mana, but I feel like it's going to come up at some point. At some point, my graveyard's going to be exiled. I'm going to be way behind everybody else, and I'm going to draw this, and it's going to give me an opportunity to present a spell that must be countered, or else we're all going to start the game over and be top decking again, which tends to favor me because my graveyard is part of my library in this deck, since I can Nethroi my creatures back. And then Amaria's Call is another card that we're trying out. The 3 life is a lot, and most of the time you are going to play this as a land, but again, if it's drawn late, this card does a little bit more than it might initially seem. So I think most people read this card and they saw, okay, create 2 4/4 white angel warriors with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible. But the part that I never see people talk about is until your next turn. So all of your creatures can now block and save you, and no one's going to attack you, basically, until your next turn. And then you've got 2 4/4s ready to rock. Those 4/4s are not indestructible, but all your other creatures are, except for Shalai in this deck, because it's an angel. I don't think Luminous Broodmoth is. No, it's an insect. So we're trying this one out. As soon as we get the black one, we will try that, but we don't have that card yet. Dryad Arbor, one of the great cards of all time. So another thing I want to talk about, colorless lands. I see a ton of people online and even in our community who just shove colorless lands in every deck. Even if it's a 3-color deck like this, they'll shove in Reliquary Tower even if they don't have that much card draw. They'll shove in Rogue's Passage even if they're not Voltron. This makes no sense. You have powerful spells in your deck. You want to be able to cast those spells on curve, on time, when they're most needed. There is a real downside, a real cost to playing too many of these colorless lands in your deck. In fact, I only put colorless lands in my deck if I'm monocolor or if they serve a very, very, very specific function. So in this deck, you can see we're a little light on the ability to discard some of our larger creatures from our hand that we're planning to reanimate later. Gyre Reach Sanitarium can help us do that. It does help our opponents smooth their draws a little bit as well, but it's certainly worth it. Giving our opponents a random loot is not gonna, the downside of that is nowhere near the upside of being able to organically get Stinkweed Imp or Golgari Grave Troll into the graveyard. Because barring that, if we don't draw any of our other discard outlets, you're casting a 5 mana 1/1 or 2/2 or 0/0 Golgari Grave Troll just to get it in the graveyard. That is not where you want to be in EDH. So we have only one land in the deck that produces colorless. It's also this idea of how frequently you need the right mana to do all the most powerful things that you can do in a given turn is also the reason why we cut Field of the Dead from this deck, even though it was pretty good in this deck as a backup plan to at least lengthen the game. I do sometimes play Tilling Treefolk in here in addition to Fabro Elder. So a lot of times I usually have 2 Treefolks in here. That's why Murmuring Bosk is pretty solid. It's essentially a tri-land forest that's fetchable that can come in untapped if I have one of those guys in my hand. And Tilling Treefolk, when I do play it, is typically not something I'm running out. I don't want to cast it till I can get value from it. And then we have Pain Lands, Shock Lands, Check Lands. We have the Triome. We have a couple of Fast Lands. We have a Horizon Canopy. We have lots of fetch lands. Lots and lots and lots of ways to gain colored sources for all 3 of our colors to make our deck as consistent as possible. Path of Ancestry I've not been impressed with. I'm actually going to take this out. The reason being, it's not worth having with all the different mana cards that I have access to, and there's a bunch that I'm not playing with. The fact that I might be able to scry one randomly when I cast my commander, or I cast Lurrus since he shares a creature type with my commander, is just not worth this coming into play tapped. I can gain access to all my other colors in better ways than that. yeah, I also have creatures that can produce any color. Deathroi, Birds of Paradise. These two guys, Bloom Tender potentially, Skull Prophet taps for 2, and Green Sun Zenith can go and get any of these guys. So this is the basic list as it currently stands as of November 4th, 2020. We're going to look at a few different versions in the next part and talk about some different card choices. We're also going to talk about some budget options if you don't own some of the key cards for each element of the deck strategy. So for Graveyard, that would be Hermit Druid, which will set you back about 20 bucks. For Sacrifice and Combo, that would be Altar of Dementia. But there's an easy fix to that. You just put in Cruel Celebrant, Blood Artist type effects. Just make sure you're not putting in humans. You can put in Corpse Knights or what have you. You want the Aristocrats type cards. And then a lot of the other cards that are central to the deck strategy are pretty cheap, but Yawgmoth unfortunately is not, because again, he does everything but your laundry. But we are going to look at a budget build of this deck that is still incredibly powerful, in which no single card is over $5. So we're going to lose access to Bloom Tender and Hermit Druid and Altar and Yawgmoth, and I believe Underrealm Lich and a few others, Finale of Devastation, but we're going to gain access to some pretty powerful alternatives that are just a little bit slower. So that's the plan for the next video. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean from Wizards of the East Coast, and